everyone, I'm your co-host Rebecca,
And I'm your co-host, Rach.
and welcome to the second episode of Ember Island Sayers.
Today we're going to talk about the first two episodes of Avatar: The Last Airbender. We have The Boy and the Iceberg and The Avatar Returns. So I will give a small summary of each of those episodes before we get started. The Boy and the Iceberg. Katara and Sokka, two siblings from the Southern Water Tribe, discover a boy trapped inside an iceberg floating on the sea. They free him, and he introduces himself as Aang, an avatar of the air nomads, a culture believed to be extinct for 100 years. The Avatar returns. After bringing Fire Nation attention to the village, Aang is banished despite Katara's objections. Zuko soon descends on the village and demands the Avatar be surrendered to him.
Just first of all, I guess I wanted to ask you, what was it like for you watching these again?
It was really fun. I've watched this show so many times, but I think season 1 is the season I've seen the least of because I did end up starting the series in the middle of season 2 when I watched it through the first time. And for some reason, I didn't find myself going back to season 1 as much as the other two. I think just because some of the characters weren't introduced until season 2 that I really enjoyed. And it's not as clean and it's not as structured as season 2 and season 3, but I still do think it's a really solid start to the show.
My impression of it was that it seemed kind of different to some of the stuff that I had seen just online in terms of like GIFs and images and stuff like that. We can talk a little bit about the animation style as well. So I can see why maybe you might have found it different.
Yeah, I think the first 2 or 3 episodes, the animation is not as polished as it could have been. But once they really start to get a hold of what the characters look like, it picks up.
So one of the things that I thought would be cool for us to talk a little bit about was the context of what was coming out around the same time as this show. And we did a little bit of research, both of us, and found out that there were a few things that debuted that year. One of the things that I thought was interesting was that Naruto, it came out in the US, at least in the same year as Avatar. And I don't know when it came out in Japan. I would imagine it came out earlier in Japan. And Dragon Ball Z was still airing around the same time on Cartoon Network. When I watched Avatar, one of the things that stood out to me was how much it seems to be influenced by anime. And the style of animation very much reminded me of, especially like, the eyes and the way they were drawn, reminded me of anime a lot. I was wondering, do you know anything about whether there was any anime influence? I imagine there was.
Yeah, if you look at the cartoons that were airing on Nickelodeon at the time, like Danny Phantom, Jimmy Neutron, I think Fairly Odd Parents, they were not at all similar to the style of Avatar. I think they really not only drew from Eastern culture and influence, but also Eastern animation style as well. And a lot of people do refer to Avatar as an anime, but I don't think that's entirely accurate.
Well, it wasn't made in Japan, I think.
Right.
That's, or, anywhere. It was made in the United States. I think I remember when it was airing being a little bit kind of unsure as to whether it was an anime or not, because again, the style is so reminiscent. I think there were other TV shows that were also on air that were kind of influenced by, even things like Teen Titans, I think was also on air at that time. And that has some anime influence in it as well, from what I remember. It's been a long time since I've watched Teen Titans. I also think it's really interesting that this first episode, actually the first 2 episodes that we watched, were directed by Dave Filoni, who, for anyone who doesn't know, Dave Filoni is kind of considered George Lucas's apprentice in terms of Star Wars, and he's responsible for The Mandalorian, which came out recently, and also Star Wars Rebels, and also Star Wars Clone Wars. So there was another TV show called Star Wars Clone Wars, which aired in 2003 and actually finished the same year that Avatar aired in 2005. And that one was by Genndy Tartakovsky, hope I'm pronouncing his name right, who also created Dexter's Laboratory, which was a great show. and was an important crew member on the Powerpuff Girls too. And he had this show that was the Clone Wars, and then later on Dave Filoni had his Clone Wars. There was actually an animated movie, and then there was a show. I don't know, it's just interesting to me that he directs these episodes of Avatar that same year that Clone Wars ended, and I wonder if that kind of the seed of an idea was kind of forming in his mind. He also directed an episode of American Dragon, Jake Long, that same year, which was a show that I confess I only watched a few episodes of, but again it has that kind of Eastern influence, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the two voice actors for Zuko and Katara were actually in Jake Long as Jake Long and Rose, his love interest. So
Right, you were telling me about that and I didn't even know, so that's super interesting too. There was probably a connection there that Dave Filoni maybe made the connection, I don't know.
true, it could be.
But yeah, I just think it's all these things that were kind of circling around Avatar are interesting to think about, and to think about where it came from and how it came to be. I wanted to talk about, to begin with, the voiceover that introduces the show. I think that what's pretty cool about that is that it gives you a lot of exposition in a very short space of time, which is really cool because this is pretty much a kids show. I mean, it's not aimed at very young kids. I think it's aimed at like older kids.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's nice because obviously it's only a 20-minute format and you get a lot of information just right off the bat, just from that voiceover.
Yeah, I also think it's interesting that it is from Katara's point of view because, a lot of, I think, especially anime is very much centered around one central character. And you would think that would kind of be Aang in this since his title is in the title of the show. But I don't think that this show really has one main character. I think that everybody gets their time. Even Zuko, who's meant to be the antagonist, has his own episodes in the first season. So it's really interesting how they spread that around.
I was actually going to ask you about that because I certainly got the impression from the first episode that Katara she's the audience's way in to the story. You hear her voiceover and then you start with her and Sokka. And so I feel like she's the one who kind of brings you into the world of the
Yeah.
show. And I was curious as to whether you thought that she was the protagonist or if you thought that it was more spread around.
It's such a unique approach, I feel like. I don't know that I had really seen anything like that before, especially in animation.
Yeah, and I think it was pretty rare at the time too to have a female protagonist in this way. I mean, just thinking about the shows that we were talking about and that were on at the time, even if you compare, let's say we compare it to the anime like Naruto and Dragon Ball Z, those two are very male focused, I think. I've actually never seen Naruto, so sorry, Naruto fans, if I'm misrepresenting Naruto. But the impression that I get, and I have seen Dragon Ball Z, quite a lot of Dragon Ball Z, most of Dragon Ball Z, and the impression that I get is that Naruto is the same in that it is very male focused.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Danny Phantom, Jimmy Neutron. Again, those are named after
right
boys. There was the Powerpuff Girls. Actually, the Powerpuff Girls I found out ended that year.
Okay.
Was the Powerpuff Girls, but that's like one of the only shows that I can think of, or cartoons that I can think of, that had like a strong kind of female protagonist, or three in the case of the Powerpuff Girls. Dexter's Lab had Dee Dee, but it was Dexter's Lab.
Right. And even with the Powerpuff Girls, I feel like that was very aimed at young girls. I don't know about a lot of young boys that watch that. That could just be my impression. But Avatar feels like it's more of a gender neutral sort of show that anybody from any gender can approach.
Yeah. I think that's probably true. And Powerpuff Girls, I think, was certainly marketed more as a girl show, although some of it is very progressive.
I've never actually seen Powerpuff Girls, so
no?
I don't know.
It's actually like they talk about, issues to do with discrimination that girls face. And there's some interesting stuff in Powerpuff Girls, some very weird stuff too. Because again, if you've watched Extras Lab, so you know Jendi Tartakovsky, kind of weird.
I think all of Cartoon Network kind of fits into that category.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, I think that's interesting to think about too, Katara being such an important character in this cartoon, which is kind of rare.
Yeah, there literally wouldn't be, a show without her, because she's the one that discovers Aang and breaks him out of the iceberg after 100 years. So she's really the catalyst to everything happening.
She is, yeah, absolutely. And on that note, actually, one of the things I wanted to talk about was this kind of theory that I have, which is that Aang is a superhero.
I mean, he is to me, but
no, but I think he is, because I think the show actually, it's funny because I know we've talked before and you said that you didn't really watch that many superhero things growing up. And I did. I watched Spider-Man. I was obsessed with Spider-Man when I was a kid. So I've always been a big superhero fan. And I think is interesting is that, in this show, they talk about people having powers. They talk about these special people who have these abilities that no one else has. And Aang is even more special than everyone else because he's the Avatar. And I saw some interesting parallels with some famous superheroes too. So like Captain America, because he's frozen in the ice, right? So
yeah.
You get that kind of parallel there, and he's like woken up. People call Captain America like the man out of time. And in a way, Aang is the boy out of time, right? Because he finds out that he's been asleep for 100 years, and he's like, well, what? No, I was asleep for a few days.
Right.
And all this stuff has happened while he was asleep, and he didn't even know. And then I thought about Superman. Obviously, at this stage, we don't really know. We don't know exactly how Aang ended up in the iceberg. It's kind of implied. He has like that dream.
Yes.
Where he sees flashes of things. But it's just this idea of, with Superman, like them sending away their child while Krypton is destroyed, right?
Yeah.
And him being like the last survivor. And Aang is the same. He's like the last of the airbenders. And I wonder if maybe there's a similar, I obviously don't know what exactly his story is, but I kind of saw a parallel there with him being the last one who was kind of sent away and preserved to save everyone, which is what Superman does. So yeah, that was my my superhero theory.
I like it, but I will not tell you how or why Aang ended up in that iceberg, because it's very interesting and I don't want to give it away.
His parents didn't send him away, did they?
I'm not saying.
So let's talk about then some of the characters. So we talked about Katara and how she's kind of our point of entry. And then at the same time as we meet Katara, we meet Sokka.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, I was surprised how unlikable Sokka comes across in the first couple of episodes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because he was my favorite when I first watched the show. And I feel like at the beginning, he was kind of just like a rigid, like sexist pessimist.
Yeah, well, she calls him a sexist straight up in the first episode.
She does. But like, you can't blame him for it, he's in this very unique position where he's the only male teenager in his tribe. Everyone older than him who's a male has gone away, so he's taken on this role that he really shouldn't have to take on. He's just trying to follow in his father's footsteps.
Yeah, and I thought that was really interesting about how he's had to grow up very quickly, both him and Katara. But I think because he's male, more is expected of him in terms of like protecting the tribe. And you get those scenes of him like trying to teach the little kids to be warriors, and the little kid is like, I need to use the bathroom.
So cute.
So cute. But I thought that was really interesting to compare to Aang as a contrast, because when Aang comes in, he is so full of fun. And even Katara says later on, she's like, he brought fun back to the tribe,
Yeah.
And that difference between somebody who's grown up with this war which has lasted longer than Sokka's lifetime, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Whereas Aang has no concept of this war because he was in an iceberg.
I feel bad for Sokka. I
Yeah,
shouldn't say he's unlikable, but he definitely goes on a journey in the few seasons.
that's nice. It's always nice to have a character go on a journey.
Yes, they all do.
Yeah.
Both physically and emotionally.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you can see him even change a little bit even over the course of the 2 episodes, right? So like in the first episode, he's very kind of dismissive of Aang and everything Aang says. And then in the second episode, when they're going to rescue Aang and he's like, he manages to get Appa to fly
Mm-hmm.
and he gets very excited for a little bit.
Yes.
So yeah, I liked that contrast. The first thing Aang says when he wakes up is, "Do you want to go penguin sledding?"
Yes. Iconic.
And my subtitles on Netflix, I don't know if you had the subtitles on when you were watching, but my subtitles said penguin sailing.
Oh no, I did not have the subtitles on, but Netflix, you need to get that together. It's penguin sledding.
But Aang, I think immediately as soon as he appears, you get that sense of like fun and kind of goofiness. And I know he's a character you love a lot. So do you want to talk about what you like about him kind of in this first appearance?
Yeah, so he's definitely he comes across as very goofy, but he acts, just the way you should expect a 12-year-old to act. And I think that it definitely does show the difference between how he had to grow up and how Sokka and Katara had to grow up. I do really enjoy his sense of adventure and his sense of fun, and I think Katara and Sokka eventually do as well.
I like that part when they are penguin sledding, not sailing. Katara says, "I haven't done this since I was a kid," and Aang is like, "You still are a kid,"
Yeah.
which is kind of cool because I think also Katara has, like Sokka, she's had to kind of grow up too fast.
Yeah, I read a really good meta about the use of maturation in Avatar and how Katara and Sokka take on the roles of their mother and father respectively, and how they have to strip away that false sense of maturation to achieve real maturity. And I think that's definitely a theme that comes into play throughout the whole series and how they develop as characters. So I'm excited for you to see that.
Yeah, me too. And I really like those kinds of stories. I think I've talked to you about before about how I have a tendency to really like characters who have to grow up or forced to grow up before they're supposed to. Unfortunately, a lot of those characters end up with tragic endings. So, one of my favorite characters is Robb Stark in Game of Thrones. One of our favorite characters is Robb
Yes.
Stark. And he is in a similar situation where he kind of he's very young in the books. I think he's like 14, right, in
Mm-hmm.
the books. And all of a sudden he has to lead an army because his dad is in big trouble. And he doesn't know what the heck he's doing, but he has to do it anyway. And I do think that's very interesting. It's very sad to see these characters who have to do that. And you also see him shed his ability to have fun too when he does
Mm-hmm.
that, because in the very beginning of Game of Thrones, or the beginning of the book, he's very much kind of mischievous and he has a lot more of that kind of sense of fun. And then later, all you get is him, at war and him kind of retreating into himself because he can't let anybody know that he has a softer side because he has to be that kind of wall, right? Because he has to support everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, this show is a lot less tragic than Game of Thrones, but there
Yeah.
definitely is a lot of suffering and tragedy that these characters have to go through. But I did want to address, even though Aang is very goofy and fun loving, there's also a real sense of, like Katara said, she senses great wisdom in him.
Right,
And
right.
I think that's great because Aang already starts to demonstrate his sacrificial nature in the first couple of episodes, how he doesn't want Katara to sacrifice her family for him, and also how he decides to get on the boat with Zuko, knowing that, this is a very dangerous situation just so that Zuko will leave the water tribe alone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that shows a really great sense of maturity and a 12-year-old, a lot of 12-year-olds probably wouldn't be that sacrificial.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree with you. And I wonder if that has probably something to do with his training that Zuko alludes to having possibly been raised by monks.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I would imagine that maybe that has something to do with that.
Yeah, we'll find out a lot more about that in the next episode. So
Oh, cool, cool. I'm looking forward to that. Do you want to talk about Zuko then?
sure, we can talk about Zuko. It's difficult for me to talk about him. I really want you to see him go on a journey, and I don't want to give too much of that away.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I already know that he doesn't stay the way he is now.
right. But he is a very interesting antagonist to the first season because he himself is a child, so you also get to see the effects that the war has had on him despite the fact that he is on the winning side of the war. So
Yeah.
that's really interesting. And his relationship with Iroh is as well.
Yeah, yeah. Iroh was an interesting character to me because, and sorry, we'll get back to Zuko, but he was interesting to me because he comes across as very likable, even though he's part of the Fire Nations, which we are told straight up at the beginning that they have, done all these horrible things. And he's so close to Zuko, but yet we still kind of like him. At least I did.
Oh
As soon
yeah,
as I
he's
saw him.
so likable.
Yeah.
He's so relatable too. He just wants his tea and his duck, and
Yeah,
everything else kind of like eh.
he was talking about how he just wanted some, oh, he was praising the roast duck, and I was like, yes, roast duck is good. I agree with you. I also thought it was interesting how he was trying to teach Zuko how to sort of be more mindful in his powers or the way he uses his powers.
Yes.
When he was talking about breathing, that kind of reminded me of yoga. Oh, he doesn't need tea because he tells Iroh he doesn't need tea.
I don't need any calming tea.
Yes. But maybe he needs yoga.
I agree. I think Iroh would agree with you too.
Because that's all, yoga is about breathing and being aware of how you breathe. And that's kind of what Iroh, I think, is trying to teach him.
Yeah, so I guess I can talk about bending styles as well now that you've said that. The 4 different types of bending are based on 4 different kinds of martial arts. And I don't claim to be like an expert on any of this, but back when the show was airing on Nickelodeon, they actually put out little commercials about the martial arts. And I don't know if you watched the credits, but there was a martial arts consultant that they had on the show. He really helped the animators nail down the fighting styles and the types of bending. Fire bending is based on Northern Shaolin. They use a lot of breathing methods in their martial arts.
There you go.
And then airbending is based on Bagua, and that uses a lot of circular motion and evading your opponent rather than striking them. So you see that a lot when Zuko and Aang are fighting on the ship, and how Aang just kind of keeps behind Zuko the whole time and evades him. That was such a funny scene to me rewatching that.
Yeah, I like the part with the mattress when he's making the
Yes.
mattress fly around, and yeah, Zuko can't do anything because he's being hit by the mattress repeatedly.
Yeah, you can see Zuko's very much a confrontational person. So I think when he comes into contact with Aang, it's like he really doesn't know how to handle this kid because Aang is like, I'm just going to dodge everything that you do.
Right, right. And that kind of fits in with Aang being raised by monks, this kind of pacifist attitude, which I have heard you talk about and I assume will come into play. And it fits too with the elements, right? Because fire, we see it as a more direct thing, right? So fire, as soon as it touches something, it burns. Whereas with air, it's kind of that moving thing, and air is only really deadly when it's moving, right?
Air is the element of freedom.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. So what about waterbending? Do you know anything about what waterbending is based on?
That was Tai Chi.
I was gonna say Tai Chi.
Really?
Yes, but I didn't want to like sound like an idiot if I was wrong. I just thought about the movements that Katara does. They kind of reminded me, when you see people doing Tai Chi, it's like those
Okay.
kinds of, you can't see me, but I'm doing the movements now. So that's really cool.
I remember watching those commercials as a kid and being like really fascinated by that.
I think that Zuko comes across pretty immediately as very angry, very kind of living up to his Fire Nation stereotype, I guess. So it will be interesting to kind of see how that evolves.
Yeah, he has a reason to be angry.
Right. Right. And it seems like he has some kind of bad relationship with his father.
Yeah, so something I noticed this time around that I had never made the connection before was the line that he says to Aang, I suppose you wouldn't know of fathers being raised by monks. And the way he says it seems very hateful. And I think part of that is coming from a place of, well, the Fire Nation has been warring with the other nations for the past 100 years. So obviously he doesn't have any appreciation for airbending culture whatsoever. But another part of that is I don't think he understands that the definition of family isn't limited to blood. I think he really holds that in a high regard, especially his relationship with his father. So that was something that really stood out to me this time around.
Well, he's a prince, right? So I'm assuming that the
Yes.
Fire Nation is a monarchy.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like, I don't know, obviously this is a fictional world, but I feel like blood is so important within monarchies, right?
Yeah.
Because what your blood is determines where you are in the line of succession, right? And it determines whether or not you are going to be the next king. So maybe that's another reason why he's very focused on family as it pertains to who you're biologically related to.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm also interested to see if he has a mother. I guess we'll find out. I don't think he mentions it
No,
in
he
the episode.
doesn't.
Okay, so we'll see. We don't see parental figures for any of the kids
Right.
in the show.
Besides Gran, she's not, Katara and Sokka's immediate parental figure.
Yeah.
And it seems like they're more trying to protect Gran than she's trying to protect them, sort of thing. So,
Yeah. She doesn't seem to be in charge of the tribe.
no.
I don't get that impression from her. I'm not sure who is. Maybe Sokka.
I think the men were in charge of the water tribe. So,
Right.
Hakoda, which is Sokka and Katara's father, he's away now. So Sokka really kind of had to step in, which is really a lot to ask of. I guess he was 14 when Hakoda and the rest of the older men stepped away. So that's a lot to ask of a 14-year-old kid.
Oh my God, he's Robb Stark.
Oh my gosh, he is. No wonder I loved Sokka so much the first time. I still love Sokka, but Aang is my favorite.
I liked him too, even though he was kind of being obnoxious in the beginning. I did still find myself warming to him, so I don't think he's completely unlikable in that first episode.
Oh, good.
One of the things that I did want to talk about a little bit was, since we're talking about Iroh and Zuko and the Fire Nation, talk a little bit about the technology. So there are some obvious parallels with industrialized nations versus non-industrialized nations, right?
Yeah.
I think we can see that pretty clearly. Zuko rolls up in the Fire Nation ship. My first thought was when the door opens, it looked like a spaceship, I feel like. And I feel like that, especially in that environment of the Water Tribe, which is kind of a very sort of sparse environment, which doesn't have a lot of technology, it really stands out. It really seems like it doesn't belong there.
Yeah, so the Fire Nation ships are heavily inspired by Imperial Japanese Navy ships. The Fire Nation is primarily influenced on Imperial Japan.
I don't know a lot of Japanese history.
I don't either.
But I do know that Japan was for a long time dominating a lot of other countries, right, within the area. So I feel like there's probably a lot of parallels there with the Fire Nation in general and Imperial Japan, I would imagine.
Yes. But even though it's kind of taken from that Eastern influence, I feel like the themes can definitely be applied to other countries.
Oh yeah, no, completely. I think any sort of colonialist narrative, right, can be applied
Hmm.
to this. And I mean, I've always been interested in that because I'm half British, which is a imperialist country, a country that has colonized a lot of other countries. And then I'm also half Brazilian, which is a country that was colonized, right, by Portugal.
Mm,
And because I've studied in both countries, I've kind of heard both sides of the imperialist
mm,
narrative and how different it is if you are in Britain and you're learning about history, and how different it is when you're in Brazil and learning about history. So much of Brazilian history was look at what these European countries did,
right.
especially Portugal in the case of Brazil. But even, England also had quite an influence on Brazil. I remember learning that a lot of the gold that was found in Brazil has ended up in the Queen's coffers, basically. The
Mm,
Queen still has it, and it's been made into crown jewels and stuff like that.
wow. Wow.
Right? And that's because at the time Portugal owed a lot of money to the
Mm,
British
okay.
Empire. Yeah, I think that's definitely going to be interesting to follow too as the show goes on, to kind of see those parallels between the Fire Nation and other imperialist countries in history.
Yeah, and we kind of get all perspectives as well, because if you look at the names of each book, they go water, earth, and fire. And even though we jump around a lot in terms of where the characters go, we do end up in each different nation as the show progresses. So it's really interesting to see the perspective also from the Fire Nation people who aren't as economically sound as the ones that are royalty.
Right.
So we also get that perspective.
It's interesting to think about how there are, again, if we compare it to, existing countries, you have these countries that have these imperialistic histories, but then you also have people within the country who were not at all involved with that, or
Hmm.
people who had no participation in that. But, you still have the legacy that your country has
Mm.
done all these things.
Yeah,
That is cool that they show the Fire Nation's perspective too.
you get a lot of that even in season one, which I think is really awesome that they managed to address that in what is supposed to be a TV show for kids.
Well, I think that, it comes down to, in the end, it's, war and how war affects people in general. And I think some of the best stories for kids actually do deal with this kind of grown-up stuff. I'm thinking about Animorphs,
Mm.
which was a book series that I loved. And actually, there was a podcast that I listened to. Shout out to Morph Club. The podcast was more recent. Animorphs was like from the 90s. You might remember it at your local Scholastic book fair. And with Animorphs, it seems kind of like a wacky concept, kids turning into animals. But what's at the core of Animorphs is, again, a story about kids in war. It offers up a very interesting story, a sad story, but there's a lot to explore within that, which I think is why it's come back to in several stories. One other thing I wanted to talk about, you reminded me when you were talking about the ship, the scene when Aang does the water bending,
Mm.
when he falls into the ocean. And by the way, so when Aang and Katara were exploring the Fire Nation ship in the first episode, that reminded me of the Little Mermaid, when Ariel is exploring the sunken ship with Flounder. And then when Aang fell into the water, I was like, oh my God, is this Little Mermaid again? Is Katara going to rescue him? What's going to happen? And she doesn't rescue him, but he does waterbend to get out of there. And then he does this thing where his like eyes light up.
Hmm.
And afterwards, he and Katara agree to go and learn waterbending, right? To visit the Northern tribe.
Yes, the Northern Water Tribe. Hmm.
Yeah, and they're going to try and learn waterbending together. But it was interesting to me that he already seemed to know it, but he didn't kind of have an awareness of it.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, don't tell her. Don't tell her, because it's really cool and I don't want her to find out for me.
Okay. All right, then we'll leave it at that. It was cool. And my kind of theory was that he has some kind of, I don't know, it's some kind of state that he goes into, like some sort of trance or something. The point of the avatar is that he can bend all the elements, right? So
Yes.
I don't know what he does. Communicate with the ancestral plane. I don't know.
I mean,
But
that
I thought that was
is
cool.
very close.
Okay, cool.
You're getting
Nice.
there.
Nice. So to end the episode, we wanted to kind of give out a couple of awards. And the first one, we were going to talk about what was our most memorable moment. Do you have one, Rach?
I think I have a couple.
Sure, go for it.
I found myself really laughing at the humor again, which was great to me because that means that it's just had the same effect over 15 years. I love the part where Sokka's like, I think you just flew 10 feet into the air after Aang has sneezed. And Aang's like, really? It felt higher than that. I don't know. I just love the way that Dante Bosco delivers the line, I don't need any calming tea. It's just so funny to me. So those are two of my most memorable moments. I just think they're so iconic.
So I have a similar kind of one, which is something that really made me laugh. Aang is on the ship and he's escaped, but he's running around. I think he's trying to find his staff.
Yes.
And yeah, he comes across Uncle Iroh's room and Uncle Iroh is sleeping. So he decides to not bother him and he just goes, sorry. And the animation, like his lips linger at the door for just a little bit longer. That made me laugh.
That's so typical Aang.
Even he likes Uncle Iroh.
Yes.
Everyone likes Iroh. What about then, who's our MVP?
So my MVP for episode 1 is definitely Katara. I think she's such a badass. Like, even though she hasn't mastered her bending powers yet, she still manages to break Aang out of the iceberg. And I also think she's great in how she deals with introducing him to the tribe. And she's kind of the only one who's, besides the little kids, the only one who's really open-minded to giving him a chance. And I don't know, I really enjoy her character in the first episode particularly. And for the second episode, I would have to say Aang is the MVP just because of the mattress bending and
Mattress bending. I like it.
And I love how they showed his fighting style in the second episode already. I think he's really brave to get on that ship with Zuko.
Well, those were the exact same as my answers. So,
okay.
In the future, maybe we'll just have to, if we disagree, then we can talk about it. But I totally agree with you. Yeah, Katara was definitely the MVP of the first episode. It is really cool that she kind of sets everything in motion. And she's the one who breaks him out of the iceberg with her anger, too, which I enjoy.
Yes.
Because female anger is often, dismissed. She's so angry, and then this iceberg breaks behind her, which is great. And just her determination she really wants Aang to be accepted in the tribe, and she's just she treats him really well. I just really like her and her initiative. And then in the second episode, I think Aang too, the way he sacrifices himself for the sake of the tribe and all the things that you talked about, he really stands out in that episode. Shout out to Iroh in the first episode too. Just because of the duck.
And shout out to Appa in episode 2 where he finally gets his butt off the ground and starts flying.
Yes. That was also good. Appa was very lethargic for most of the 2 episodes. Was he just tired? I think he was just tired.
I think he was. Poor guy. He's very large. He probably needed a snack or something. He's been stuck in that iceberg for 100 years. We can't all have the same energy as Aang, so
that makes sense. Yeah, and it was really nice to see him flying and to see how excited they were about it. And I'm looking forward to Momo whenever Momo will appear.
Maybe next episode you'll see Momo.
Yay! Sounds good. The way the last episode ended was they were on their way to the Northern Tribe. So I assume now they'll be going on adventures.
Yeah, Aang had a lot of stops on his map that he wanted to take. So.
Yeah, that's right. He wanted to do lots of activities which involved annoying wildlife, I think.
Yes. Riding the hopping llamas, I think, was one of them.
Okay, cool. So that was our first episode. I just want to say thank you to anybody who's listening.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for being patient with us as we figure out how to podcast.
Yes.
We're still learning. We hope that you will tune in next time, where we are going to be talking about the third episode,
The Southern Air Temple.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Stay flamin'.
Stay flamin'. I still don't know what that means, but stay flamin'.